The vision received was that of blood cells, traveling throughout the body, supplying the much-needed oxygen and other nutrients to the differing members of the body to fulfill their purpose. Once the blood cells are spent, they must return back to the heart to be refilled before being sent out again and fulfill their purpose. Hello again, brothers and sisters, and faithful listeners to our Father's Heart podcast. Today is a second part in a series that I'm just going to title, Now That the Holidays Are Over. This will be released after the year has been over and after all the official holidays that go along with the end of the year have passed. And I decided kind of in maybe Thanksgiving or December time that I wanted to kind of produce this because one of the things that we've learned over the years is that when we share about holidays, the best time is never during the holidays, because most people are just into the holidays, and it's almost like, going to a birthday party and being the party pooper. Someone who's having their birthday party is not going to be listening to someone that's just kind of pooping on their party, if you will. And that's kind of the same thing with, holidays. The last time or the last moment that you want to be speaking to someone about that is probably during the holidays when they're in the midst of it because they're invested in it. They're engrossed in it. And so that's not something that we like to do. So now that the holidays are over, I thought it's a more appropriate time because now that the holidays are over, you got to have your, whatever it is that you get out of the holidays, you've gotten it. You may now have a, sober mind, a clear mind to just kind of think of it now that it's outside, it's past, and maybe give it its due diligence of consideration. So last podcast, I shared with my wife and my eldest daughter. But I want to reiterate something that I had mentioned on that podcast, but because of the way our conversations went, it didn't kind of go as I planned it, which is fine. But, one of the things that I shared was I quoted Jack Deere, who said, "What we must do, rather, is acknowledge that we are full of tradition, good or bad, to a much greater extent than we realize, and must learn to ask by the light of Scripture critical questions about what we have thus far taken for granted." I think that's a very apropos quote, considering the subject matter and the material that I'll be talking about today. I think a lot of the holidays that we partake in are just traditions. And honestly, some traditions are good. Some traditions are indifferent, neither here nor there. And some traditions are just bad. And when I say traditions, I'm kind of referring to the holidays. Now, recently I just looked at, some of the holidays that we in America partake in. Obviously, American holidays is not worldwide, but some of them are, like New Year's. Most everybody in the world will, celebrate New Year's, the ending of the year, the starting of the new year. And so that's kind of a global holiday. But there's specific holidays that, may not be so global. Like recently I looked at and found out that Super Bowl Sunday is considered a holiday. Now, it's actually Super Bowl Sunday. I mean, I never thought about that. I mean, Super Bowl Sundays have been moved. I remember, watching Super Bowls in January, and then they moved and came a little bit later in January, and then they moved again and can now in February. And, if you look at the history, it's all about ratings, marketing, and money. So that's why that particular, if you consider it a holiday, has moved. But, in America, there is Valentine's Day in February. There's St. Patrick's Day. There's April Fool's Day. There's Easter. Then if you go into the third of the year. You've got Mother's Day, you've got Father's Day, Memorial Day, Independence Day. Some of those I think are focused mainly in America. There's kind of new ones. There's Parents' Day. I've never heard that before. Friendship Day. Then there's obviously Labor Day, which is more an American cultural holiday. There's Columbus Day, which, has been fought at by the Alphabet Mafia and the Woke Brigade, and they don't like Columbus Day for their reasons. And then you've got, obviously you end the year with Halloween in October, Veterans Day, Thanksgiving in November, and then you have Hanukkah and Christmas and Kwanzaa. So some of those are global, some of those are really American-centered. But I guess in thinking about what I wanted to share, as I said in the last podcast, growing up, I celebrated most of these holidays I just named. And when I say celebrate, I mean I partook in them. It's not like it was a big shindig. It wasn't something that was a major force in my life. It's just something that we did in America. So, we partook in them. 4th of July, it was nice. It was a time that we had a time off to be with family. We got to see fireworks. And, like I said, some of these holidays are just indifferent. They're just neither, they're good. I mean, some of them are indifferent because you really don't care. But if they're good, if they are something that you kind of invest yourself in, and there's really no evil, connotations to it. But in this particular podcast, I think it would behoove you to hear what are some of the origins of the holidays that we partake in. And when we said in the last podcast, there was a time in 2008 where I thought, we were homeschooling. We need to teach our kids how to write and write, papers that are persuasive. And I thought it would be good for us to go to the library, which is something I personally haven't done in regards to this topic, and just research some of the more popular traditional holidays that are out there. And I think it was around near the end of the year in 2008. So the first one we did was Halloween. Now, for me as a Christian, if you've listened to our testimonies from prior episodes, even though I went to Christian schools all my life, and I considered myself a Christian, even though I wasn't a biblical Christian, as I came to know in my adulthood, I participated in all of those things without really a care or regard to the origins of holidays. But whether I was a Christian or not a Christian, I think the most obvious holiday that Christians should have issues with partaking in is Halloween. Whether you do a research into its history or not, I mean, that's the one that is just so blatantly obvious. Every time October comes around, I'm sure you all have seen it. Advertisements for the horror movies. Either they're repeating horror movies that have been given out in the past, and they're, scheduling certain horror movies to start showing as you near closer and closer to October 31st. So it's really public. It's not even hidden. It's very popular. Or you're seeing the next movies that are going to come out, that are more horror flicks. And so that's pretty well known if you're living in America, that's what it's tied to. It's tied to horrific things, murder, demonic stuff, possession, just evil and wicked things are always highlighted. I mean, the darkness and the dark behaviors of man is just elevated to an extent, and demonic activity is elevated to an extent. Some of the most popular movies are really glorifying demonic possession in people. I'm not even going to name the movies. I'm sure you're well aware. If you've been living in America for any significant period of time, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you're watch TV or you're sort of into, Hollywood and TV shows, I'm sure you've seen it. So that's to me the most obvious. But, we used to live in Miami, Florida. And in Miami, Florida, it is a southern state, but it's not considered the South, as many of you in Georgia and Florida do know. Florida is really not considered the South, even though it is a southern state in America. But in Miami, Florida, there was more of a Hispanic culture, a lot of mixture of different Spanish cultures and nationalities. But there was never really, a celebration of Halloween from in the Southern way. And when I say the Southern way is when we moved to Georgia, there was something called Harvest Fest. We never saw that in Miami, Florida, Harvest Fest. And I understand now that the harvest usually comes around October and they're harvesting their agriculture and stuff. But they also attributed trunk or treat. And that was a part of their way of doing trick or treat in a very safe way, because there was also the concern of, there's some people out there that would harm the children by giving them giving them treats that are, with some dangerous thing inside or just trying to protect them. So they would come to the trunks of the cars and they would get their treats from there. Well, that didn't come about in America, this idea of trick or treat or trunk or treat. It actually, if you look back into its history, and so this is where I'm just going to share some facts, and I would ask you to verify it. Find out for yourself. In today's day and age, 21st century, in 2021 or 22 now, everybody uses Google. Everybody uses Wikipedia. And to be honest with you, with what I have heard about how Google filters information to give you specific information that they want you to see, I would not rely solely upon Google. With what I've seen happen with Wikipedia over the years, it seemed to be a great initial idea, but when you have particular interest in certain things being portrayed in a certain way, I've come to realize that even Wikipedia has been quote unquote hacked in a sense. And so the people that are editing the material there are editing it for specific purposes and biases that they have. And so Wikipedia has been called into question as well. So when we did our research, we went directly to the library. Did we use the internet? Yes. But we looked into encyclopedias. We looked into books. And we found information that is in hard print and is verifiable. This is what I liked about encyclopedias. You can always see, okay, well, where did this source information come from? Where did this information, what was the source material for it? So, just looking at Halloween, this came from the Encyclopedia Americana from 1990. And Halloween, according to the information that we found from this, was a festival of Scottish-Irish origin. And on October 31st, it was called All Hallows Eve. And the elements and the customs can be traced back to Druid ceremonies in pre-Christian times. So you might ask, well, what's a Druid? Some of you may know. Some of you may never heard of a Druid. But a Druid is or was a religious order. It was like priest of magician sages. And they were very proliferate in the ancient Celts of Gaul in Britain. And some of the responsibilities that these magician sages had, these druids, was they conducted ceremonies of divination. They conducted ceremonies of sacrifice. And some of those sacrifices were animals and some of them were humans. Now, Irish druids emphasized the powers of shape-shifting, incantation, trances, and they dressed in animal flesh, in birds and wings, and they were very shamanistic, which is from Native American origin. You know, shamans were kind of the head religious or spiritual person in Native Americans. And so that they were called shamans. So the Encyclopedia Americana noted that that was very shamanistic. Now, the Celts had festivals. They had certain times where they celebrated certain things. And one of the festivals was celebrating the sun god and the god of the dead. And the god of the dead is known as Samhain. Some of you may be familiar with that name, Samhain. If you've been a part of Halloween to any extent, you may have come across that name. So that name comes from this festival of the Celts. And Samhain was the god of the dead. He was commemorated on November 1st, which is the new year for the Celts. And later, this was incorporated into Christian rituals. So in the 9th century, they began to have feast in honor of all the saints. And so that's why they called it All Hallows. Now, when we say Christian rituals, what I started realizing as I did research in this was what the encyclopedia considered Christian was actually Catholicism. And so for me, I started realizing, so there is definitely a difference between Christian and Catholicism. And I guess we can get into that later. But I started realizing that. And so in the 11th century, they had a feast called All Souls Day, celebrated on November 1st. So it kind of morphed and kind of changed over the years from 9th to 11th century. We're talking about 200 years. And they basically started on All Souls Day on November 1st, commemorating all those who died in the previous year. So they were celebrating basically their loved ones that died in the past. And so this spread about in Europe in medieval times. You had elves and fairies and witches who took the form of cats, who were superstitiously believed to fly around All Hallows Eve. And that progressed into bonfires that were lit up to ward off evil spirits. So Halloween involved rituals that were used to foretell the future. So all of this was stated in this Encyclopedia Americana. And so it was just sharing with us, how did it morph? How did it begin? And it began as a cultural festival of the Celts and the Druid religious order. And it just sort of morphed and changed and took on other elements to it that weren't originally a part of it. So the Halloween traditions from Scotland and Ireland are the ones that influenced America the most. This is where we get pumpkins. The pumpkins replaced turnips that were used in Scotland and Ireland. And they were carved out as jack-o'-lanterns. That's where we get the pumpkin and the jack-o'-lantern. In the 19th century, Irish people believed that little people, fairies, played pranks on Halloween. So the young boys and the young men started to carry out practical jokes on that night. And so in the 20th century, again, it's just showing how it morphed, how it progressed, how it, started changing and rearranging and melding of old ideas with new ideas. And so in the 20th century, kids would dress up in costumes and they would travel door to door saying, trick or treat, trick or treat. Okay, so that's kind of how this Halloween tradition morphed. I mean, it literally came from as far back, as what this encyclopedia said, from the 9th century, from the Celts and the Druids. Okay. Then we looked at the World Book Encyclopedia. This was from 1989. Again, it also confirmed that children wear costumes, they go trick-or-treating, jack-o'-lanterns are carved out as pumpkins. The activities that included were fortune-telling, storytelling about ghosts and witches, and bobbing for apples. In the 800s, the church, meaning the Catholic Church, established All Saints' Day on November 1st so that people would continue a festival they had celebrated before becoming Christians. That's important to note, that there was already a celebration happening. There was already a festival. There was already some sort of holiday taking place among pagans. And the Catholic Church came in and they were trying to grab in those quote unquote pagans, barbarians, heathens into the Catholic Church. And so what the Catholic Church did was they redressed the holiday. They clothed it with different attire. They changed names so that they could reach the pagans, the heathens, and bring them into the Catholic Church. So again, originally this was a Druid religious order and system that went into Celtic influence, who celebrated the sun god and the god of the dead, Samhain, all on November 1st. And so the Catholic Church is trying to corral them in, and so they change it to All Saints' Day. And again, this was a mass that was called also All Hallow Mass. It was the evening before, called All Saints' Day, that became Halloween. Okay? So there's that hollow part being a part of the Halloween. It was All Saints' Day, or All Hallow Mass. Okay? So trick-or-treating is done by dressing in a costume, coming out to a house to get candy or fruit. But most people know that in America. Jack-o'-lanterns, again, replaced the turnips, potatoes, and the beets in England and Ireland. So again, we're just getting confirmation of information from different sources. Then according to Irish legend, we found out that a man named Jack could not enter into heaven because he was a miser. He could not go into hell because he played jokes on the devil. So the result was that he had to walk the earth with his lantern until Judgment Day. Wow. So that's kind of the origins of the ideas of the jack-o'-lantern. And Jack was a guy that couldn't go into heaven for a particular reason, couldn't go into hell for other reasons. So he had to walk with the earth with his lantern until the Day of Judgment. Now, fortune telling was also confirmed again as always being a part of Halloween. It began in Europe hundreds of years ago. They would bake a cake and they would put objects such as a coin or a ring or a thimble into the cake. And whoever got the piece of cake with the coin would supposedly become rich. Whoever got the ring would supposedly get married. Whoever got the thimble would actually never get married. So that's a part of the fortune telling. That's today, that practice, we find it in card reading. We find it in palmistry, in addition to other older methods. So we're just rehashing the history of Halloween as it's found in the encyclopedia, and we're seeing commonalities of themes and topics. It also summarized the idea that from its history, the Celtics, the Druids, celebrated Samhain, the Celtic Lord of Death, on their new year of November 1st. So all of this Halloween, it originated from Celtic Druid religious worship of the god of the dead. That's what Halloween, from its root, we're looking at roots, from its root, that's who they are, that's who was worshipped. Halloween today comes from the fact that people were worshiping the god or the Lord of death, the god of the dead. His name was Samhain. So as Christians, I would think if you didn't know any of that history, I think knowing that history would automatically should, give you some pause, give you a sense of conviction that, wait, they were worshiping the god of the dead. They were worshiping the Lord of death. Okay. So again, they also summarize the Druids were priests. They were teachers of the Celts. So they were kind of like, Israel had elders. Elders were the teachers. And so the Celts had Druids. Druids were the teachers of the Celtic people. And they were taught to build huge fires that were considered sacred. And in these fires, they burned animals. They burned their crops. Excuse me. And sometimes they burned humans. Each family would relight their hearth fire with the fire that the Druids made. And sometimes people wore costumes made of animal heads and skins. And by looking at the inside of the dead animals, they would begin to tell fortunes of the future. So today, over the last 21st, 20th century, maybe late 19th century, I don't think it was 19th century, but this idea of putting on costumes, where did it originate from? Well, it originated from Celtic practices where they dress themselves up as animals. And in dressing themselves up as animals, they looked into the animal's intestines and they began to tell fortunes. I don't know about you, but that's witchcraft. If you didn't know that, that's speaking of highly in the Bible, witchcraft. Now, the Romans conquered the Celts in the 1st century. The Roman kingdom, the Roman Empire, conquered the Celts in the 1st century. And so there were 2 Roman autumn festivals that were mixed with the Celtic festivals. So I'm not talking about the Catholic Church now. I'm talking about the actual Roman Empire, the one that was in power in the days of Jesus' flesh in the 1st century. They were conquered back then. But the Romans had their own traditions, their own holidays and customs, and they had 2 autumn festivals, and they were mixed together with Celtic festivals. So we call that an amalgamation, where you're taking bits and pieces from one thing over here, and you're taking bits and pieces from other things over here, and you're merging them together, and you're coming up with something kind of new, but it's still traced and held to the old. And so that's what happened when Roman Empire conquered. In order for them to take over the people more easily, they would kind of allow them to continue their festivals, but they merged them with their own festivals. And it became kind of a neo festival, if you will. So it says here in the 800s, many converted to Christianity. Now it's talking about the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church. Because what they did was, in order to convert the people to Catholicism, which the American Encyclopedia where we got this from, or the World Book Encyclopedia where we got this from, and of course the Encyclopedia Americana that we got this from, when they speak of Christianity, they're actually specifically referring to the Catholic Church and what they did. So what the Catholic Church did in the 800s is that they kept celebrating the pagan Celtic festivals, but the church incorporated those festivals with church rituals. And so that's how the original Celtic festival came to be known as All Saints' Day. The church, the Catholic Church, later honored the dead on November 2nd with All Souls' Day. So you see, over time, over a certain period of time, it morphed, it changed, it became like a neo-Celtic festival that incorporated church rituals and traditions with the Celtic festival, and it became a new thing. So in Ireland, it says that they held a parade in which they honored a god named Muck Ola. The leader of the parade wore all white and a mask made from the head of an animal. So you see, in Ireland, even centuries after, talking about after 800s, in Ireland, they still kept some of the practices and rituals that were done hundreds of years beforehand. It says in Scotland, they lit huge bonfires on the hillsides to drive away witches and other evil spirits. Now, maybe Scotland and the people and their, remember, this is all in the Dark Ages. If you know anything about the Dark Ages, it's like from, 200, 300 AD all the way to maybe 17, 1800. All of this was done in the Dark Ages. So the Scottish kind of put together this idea of these Celtic Druids and their fires, these sacred fires that they did many, many hundreds and hundreds of years beforehand. Ireland took that idea, maybe unbeknownst to them, and then put in the idea of that, we're trying to drive away witches and evil spirits, kind of a superstitious thing. And then it also says Halloween did not become popular in America till the 1800s, because that was when America received a huge number of Scottish and Irish immigrants who celebrated their ancestors' Celtic festivals. So with that, I kind of end the summary of Halloween and what we found out. Like I said, I think in Christians' minds and perspective, that should be the most obvious one without any research into its history. I mean, it's just outrightly evil in its dress. I mean, it just is. It's just evil and wicked in its dress. It glorifies nothing other than darkness and the powers of darkness and the God of darkness, if you will. And if you look into its history, it just confirms why Halloween is marketed the way that it is in America. And Halloween is just, and actually most holidays in America are really used as marketing schemes to make money in America. The multinational corporations, the big businesses, they don't really care about the origins, but they will use whatever is in culture, whatever is in the society to then make money off of the people. So you see the major holidays, you see major marketing campaigns, and that's just because they're just using it to make money. But going back to us being children of God, I always ask myself the question, and it's a question that I kept asking myself as I was researching many of these holidays, and what should I do about it? My question would become, well, I didn't walk with Jesus. He lived in the first century. The disciples did. All I can do is look at the Bible to see what they participated in, what they didn't participate in. And it says in Jeremiah, it's something that my wife brought up that impacted her many years ago. And what impacted her was, I think it was verse 3 and 4, she said, but I'd like to read verse 1 and 2. It says, "Hear the word of the Lord which speaks to you, O house of Israel. Thus says the Lord, do not learn the way of the Gentiles. Do not be dismayed at the signs of the heaven, for the Gentiles are dismayed at them, for the customs of the people are futile." That's just reading 1, 2, and part of 3. This is what God wanted the Israelites to not do. Don't learn the way of the heathen, the pagans, the Gentiles that surround you, because they will unduly influence you and cause you to walk in fear and in dismay. That's why he did not want them to learn their ways or their practices. So this is the influence that Jesus, the disciples, and the Jews that lived in his day all walked in. None of the Israelites or the Jews in Jesus' day celebrated the festivals of pagans, of Gentiles. They didn't do that. They were told not to do that. And so I read in the scriptures nothing about Jesus participating in All Hallows Eve or All Saints Day none of that stuff even existed at the time that he was walking. But they definitely weren't participating in Celtic Druid festivals, of whom the Romans conquered in the first century. We know that for a fact. It's nowhere recorded in scripture that they did that because they were told not to from centuries before. So my question became, if I know the truth in the scriptures of what Jesus accepted and what he rejected, if Jesus were walking in the days of the 8th century, the 9th century, the 11th century, all of these dates, all of these, geographical regions that were talked about in this research that we did, if Jesus was living in those days, would Jesus be participating in those rituals of the Celts and the Druids and the practices that the Catholic Church brought in? Would he be a part of all of that, knowing its root is worshiping the Lord of Death, the God of the dead, Samhain? I think not. So to me, Halloween is the most obvious one why Christians should not partake in them. And so what I'm going to do is, the next time around, we will get into another holiday and look at its roots, look at its origins, and then consider, does that have any bearing on whether I should partake in that particular holiday or not? I hope this information blessed you. Please go ahead and confirm it on your own. Do research on your own. I'm telling you where I got this research from so that you will find it. You can confirm everything. It is the Encyclopedia Americana 1990 edition and the World Book Encyclopedia 1989 edition. And then I'm sure that you will find a whole lot more information, but just vet the information and make sure that it is reliable and that it takes from source material and not just opinion pieces from different articles, but actually has well-researched, people of historical authority that could vouch for the veracity and the validity of the information that you find. And then always go to the Lord and ask him, because the word of God should be our final authority. Thus is the ministry of our Father's heart through us. Our utmost desire is to be in the Father's heart, to know the Father's heart, and express the Father's heart to you. If you appreciate listening to this podcast and were blessed, pass it along to someone else by text, email, or word of mouth in the hopes that they might be positively impacted as you were. If you are interested in supporting our efforts, we would ask you to consider the following. 1, pray for us. 2, leave a positive rating or review with whomever you listen to our podcast with. And 3, if you desire to contribute monetarily, you can do so at paypal.me/JBenJesus or Cash App $JBenJesus or Venmo JBenJesus. That's JBenJesus. God bless.